yeah, when I start a book, I feel like I have to finish it.
Yeah.
And he's a pastor himself. Like, he put his hands out and he said, "My brother Jeff, I hereby release you from feeling as though you have to finish every book."
Well, if you're anything like me, you probably enjoy reading. Maybe you enjoy reading nonfiction, you enjoy reading fiction, maybe you enjoy reading, as a pastor or ministry leader, ministry-related books, leadership-related books, spiritual formation-related books, world-related books, books that help us know and understand the world. This is important for leadership. It's important for ministry. It helps us connect with people in ways that maybe we couldn't have, because reading helps us get a perspective that we don't bring ourselves, because we haven't had all the experiences that the author of a particular book has had. Right? Reading is really important. And so I'm excited to have this conversation with Jeff Crosby today. Jeff Crosby is president of the ECPA, which is the Trade Association of Christian Publishers, and also the author of World of Wonders, A Spirituality of Reading. This is Jeff's third time on this podcast. You can also find a great conversation with him, episode 96, Crossing Leadership Thresholds, and then also episode 194, titled Saudade, Leadership and Nurturing the Inner Life. And saudade is a Portuguese word. You'll find it. So I'm excited to bring this conversation to you. I'm Marcus Watson, and this is episode 312 of Spiritual Life and Leadership. Well, Jeff, I would love to know what your habit of reading looks like. You seem to read a lot based on what I saw in the book and what I know of you. Tell us a little bit about your habit and practice of reading and where that came from.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I do read a lot. I think one of the benefits I have is I'm married to a woman who reads even more voraciously than I do. So, a lot of time that we spend together, especially late at night, early in the morning, is reading. But it hasn't always been that way. Until I was 17, 18 years old, I primarily read the Sunday newspaper comics, Beetle Bailey and Snuffy Smith and, Peanuts and things like that. And then I read, short biographies of sports heroes of that day, Willie Mays and Hank Aaron and people like that. But it really was the reading of a book about a young woman in search of a Ukrainian woman in search of her U.S. admiral, naval father that she had never known. And there was something about this memoir which I saw, promoted on Good Morning America with David Hartman and Joan London. So I'm dating myself. We're talking about the late 1970s.
Yeah.
Something about that just lit a fire under me, and I began to read. And it was as if a world opened up to me that I didn't know existed. And so it just then, kept building and building over time. And so what it looks like for me today is anytime I travel, there's one, if not two books in the travel bag, reading morning and night without exception, virtually. And it also involves reading with grandchildren. One of the chapters in the book talks about reading in the seasons of family life. So there's been a whole new experience of reading I have 6 grandchildren, and revisiting classics, but also introducing myself and them to newer things. And I also read as part of my spiritual formation. So there's sort of a combination of reading and journaling that I have found very, very helpful. It's a way to capture my emotions as I read, my questions, my thoughts, my longings as I read a book. What is connecting? What am I aggravated by in that work? So there's a whole formational piece to it. A combination then of reading for pleasure, reading for diversion, especially in the fraught times we're living in right now, reading a lot more fiction, I think, and poetry because of that. But it's also just the discipline of carving out time. And so it does mean there are certain things that I don't know much about, like movies and things like that, but in order to make that space.
Yeah. Do you have sort of a special place in your house or your office or whatever where you like to read? Is there sort of a when and a where for you when you
Um,
read?
yeah, there is. I know a lot of people say that, if they start reading when they lie down at night, to rest, that they immediately go to sleep. That's not my experience at all. So one of the wins and wears is morning and night, as I'm, awakening, and as I'm, preparing to sleep. When I travel, on airplanes, rather than plugging into the Southwest Airlines, free TV and movies, I almost always choose to read either long form journals like the Atlantic or the New Yorker, or read the books that I carry along with me. When I worked at InterVarsity Press, which is where I was when you and I first met, I had a cafe that I would go to because I had a commute, to the office. Now, with ECPA, I work out of my home, so I've kind of lost that third place, to read what I used to do. But I'll still occasionally. My wife and I will leave early in the morning, and we'll go to a coffee shop, and we invariably take books with us and read there, as well as catch up on email and things like that. But primarily, it's in the home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hesitate to ask this question because it's going to make many of us feel um, uh, not a little bit insufficient. But how many books do you read in a year, would you say?
Yeah, I do journal the things that I read, and every
Uh-huh.
December, I post my top 25 of
Yeah.
that year. So books that come out from December of one year to November of the
Yeah.
next,
Yeah.
and I always post them on the first week of December. I would say on average it's 75,
Well,
is
75. Yeah.
probably an average year. When I
Okay.
worked in publishing directly, it was quite a bit more than that, because part of
Right.
my work was
Right.
reading manuscripts,
Right.
preparing for the publication of books. So
Right. Right.
back then it would have been more, but yeah, it averages, one and a half,
Yeah.
some years two a week, but 75 is a good
Yeah.
ballpark. And I think in the 2.5 months or so of this year, I'm at 30. So I'm trending ahead,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
encountered a lot of things that I especially wanted to read.
Okay. Okay. Now this, I hope this is okay to ask. Do you? Because sometimes, well, so I read for my work as well, both as a pastor and
Sure.
as a podcaster. And sometimes I will skim. Do you ever skim? Or when you say you read one and a half or two a week, I'm like, that's a lot.
It
Uh,
is a lot.
yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I used to, if I started a book, I felt like I had to finish it.
Oh, okay.
And I was doing an interview with an author for a little conference we put on called the Art of Writing.
Mm-hmm.
And when he heard, I said that to him,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, when I start a book, I feel like I have to finish it.
Yeah.
And he's a pastor himself. Like, he put his hands out and he said, "My brother Jeff, I hereby release you from feeling as though you have to finish
uh,
every book." And that was maybe two
yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. Oh,
Since that time, I have, I'll get 50, 75, maybe 100 pages into a book, and if it is just not making a connection, I mean, I have put them down.
good. Good.
Once I get past that
Mm-hmm.
threshold of that 50,
Uh-huh.
75, 100, I do tend to finish, and I tend to not
Yeah.
skim. I
Yeah.
even the words, like if I encounter a word that I don't know, I will jot that word down, and go back
Yeah.
and make sure I understand
Yeah. Yeah.
it. So it is pretty much
Yeah.
a word for word.
Okay.
But in these days, as I'm
Yeah.
getting older and looking at fewer
Yeah.
years left to read all the things that I want to read, I'm giving
Yeah.
myself permission to
Good.
bow out from time to time.
That's great. That's great. I have recently started doing that too, mostly with the fiction that I read. So
Okay.
I want to ask you, well, a little bit more about reading as a spiritual practice, but I'm just reflecting on my own practice of reading. I tend to read nonfiction in the morning. So, and what I'll do is I'll do some scripture time, and then I'll read something very more contemplative, more like just read maybe a page or something, just a small section, and just let that sort of sit with me. And then I'll read, more, several pages or a chapter, or probably not a full chapter, but half a chapter of just a nonfiction, more like for information kind of a book. And those I do tend to kind of stick with, but my nonfiction or my fiction, which I read in the evening until I fall asleep, and sometimes that's quick, and sometimes it's not. But but I've noticed that I'm sometimes lately disappointed with some of the fiction I've chosen, where I'm like, and I like science fiction,
Okay.
and but I like smart science fiction. I don't like where it's just a description of a bunch of space battles. Like, I want to know what's going on inside the people. And so that's when I've put it down. I'm like, I don't care how many blasters there were, Anyway, that's my little reflection on
Well,
what
I'm
you're
glad you
sharing.
give
But yeah.
yourself that permission.
Yeah, yeah. So I would love to hear a little bit more about reading as a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, just kind of unpack that idea for us. How do you understand reading as a spiritual
Yeah.
practice? And let me
Well,
ask this: one of the things that you say. Well, go ahead and start, and then I'll come up with this other
yeah.
question.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the foundational ideas is that in reading, not just for diversion or for fun, but as a spiritual practice, you're welcoming God
Mm-hmm.
you're welcoming the Father, Son, Spirit into the practice of reading, hoping, expecting, welcoming,
Mm-hmm.
inviting um, one's life to be transformed in some way,
Mm-hmm.
small or large, through that. And I believe that happens, and I believe
Mm-hmm.
being aware that you're welcoming that and attempting to be conscious of that. And the journaling for me it's almost a response to the way God is meeting me in the midst of that reading. And sometimes it is a novel. During the early months of the pandemic, there were novels by a writer named Kent Haruf, like Benediction and Plainsong and Eventide, that when
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't read nonfiction, I could read the Psalms and I could read this gentleman's novels.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact was a deeply spiritual experience.
Yeah.
The other thing, and you hinted at this with how your reading day is structured. I love reading things like John Bailey's The Diary of Private Prayer,
Mm.
as morning and evening.
Yeah.
And I use that at least once a year, if not more. And it's like 31 days of reading morning and evening, an old Scottish cleric
Mm.
from the
Yeah.
early part of the 20th century. Or more recently, the Douglas McKelvey books, Every Moment Holy, that the Rabbit Room has published, liturgies around grief, liturgies around family, and rites of passage and things like that. So also being mindful of just of reading things that are set up very intentionally to cultivate one's prayer life, and those invitations and recognitions of God's presence in the midst
Yeah.
of our reading.
Yeah. This is what I was going to mention a minute ago. One of my favorite things that you said in the book, one of the things that really just jumped out at me, was you said that reading unselfs me, and
Yeah.
I would love for you to tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, well, I think, it sort of decenters, by entering into the thoughts, the experiences, the stories, the words. In the case of poetry, I included a long poem by a Nebraska poet, a former poet laureate, named Ted Kooser, and it was called Estate Sale. And this poem, when I read it, I wasn't here. I wasn't I wasn't this Midwestern publishing person, but I was on that Nebraska farm with that writer, with that poet, attending that estate sale, seeing the can of old rusty nails, or the wooden wooden window frame or the piano or whatever at these estate sales, the old baseball up in the sill of the garage window. I think it just reading has the opportunity or the possibility of taking us out of the center of our universe and putting us in another's lives and another's shoes. I think that's one of the reasons to read more diverse voices, not whether it's men reading women or vice versa, or theological streams or racial identities, ethnic identities, things like that. That's a part of the unselfing of me that and I think that it creates a sense of greater empathy for our neighbors, which we very much need
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
moment. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I didn't remember using that particular word, Marcus, but it's consistent with what I
Yeah.
think reading
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
done for me and can do, for all of us
Yeah.
if we're watching and
Yeah.
listening, paying attention.
Well, let's talk. You mentioned reading diverse voices. I'd love for you to just say more about that. Like, what's the value? In what way have you found value for you in reading diverse voices?
Yeah. I mean, I give you an example. Now we're very much focused on what's happening in Iran and in Cuba or Venezuela. A few years ago, Syria was very much on our minds, I think, globally, and certainly on mine. And reading a memoir from a Syrian writer whose parents immigrated just before she was born, a woman named Alia Malik, and the book just transported me not only into her life but into that country, and helped me understand, how did we get to where we were those few years ago. So that would be a global example. I mean, a more close to home, something like Esau Macaulay's book, reading scripture while black. The understanding of we all bring our own lenses to the reading of books, the listening of music, or the looking at art, like the Rembrandt on your wall, and certainly reading scripture. And I think what Esau helped us to do, or others, James Cone, um, the cross and the lynching tree would be an example. I didn't necessarily agree with everything that Cone said, but as a writing as a black man about these two things, the cross of Christ and the lynching tree of the American South and parts of the Midwest, it was pretty profound, and it just caused me to think about things that if I just stayed in my lane of John Stott and J.I. Packer and James Bryan Smith and people like that, I wouldn't have encountered. So I think it stretches us. It gives us a greater sense than in our bite-sized reading that so many of us do so much of the time could ever
Yeah.
realize.
Yeah. I find that it's hard to read very diverse voices, because, and I think partly maybe it's just because of the world we live in right now, where our phones feed us what we want, rather than maybe more of what we need, and so
Yeah.
we get used to that. And so as you're sharing this, I was thinking about, um, you know. I have not yet read Reading While Black or The Cross and the Lynching Tree. There's a part of me that's a little bit scared to read them. I'm just confessing here, right? Because there's probably some
That's
hard
okay.
truths that
Yeah.
I need to be aware of. And I would probably, well, I may or may not agree with everything you said. You didn't agree with everything, but I think I would probably learn a lot. That's sort of moving in one direction. But what about reading diverse voices going in the other direction? Not necessarily like racist voices, but more conservative voices. So there's sort of a tension there. Like, I could like I feel okay about reading diversity in one direction, but I might have a harder time reading diversity in another direction. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope that I'd have to go back and look at my journals of everything I've read the last few years. I think that I read in more conservative directions, perhaps, than what my normal inclinations might suggest. I mean, InterVarsity Press, being there for 24 years, it's kind of the center of the bullseye for me in terms
Yeah.
of my reading, or Nav Press, or
Yeah.
some publishers like that. But yeah, I do think it's important. I mean, Catholic reading in the direction of Catholic
Hmm.
writers as well, or
Hmm.
Orthodox
Interesting. Yeah.
writers. But yeah, often we are. It's easier for us to go in the direction of that which will affirm our current
Yeah.
beliefs. And
Yeah.
so I think of myself as sort of a centrist or moderate
Mm-hmm.
person, and I do try to
Yeah.
push myself to both ends.
Mm.
What you said about the phone is
Mm.
really important. I've talked to my grandkids and even my own two children about that the algorithms of the digital technology
Yeah.
are determining what's put in front of us. And it's one of the reasons I still take two printed newspapers every morning. And
Hmm.
the end of my driveway, I walk out
Oh.
and pick up, these two polybag newspapers,
Yeah.
because there are no algorithms to that. And I
Yeah.
can dive into the day's news or the arts or book
Mm.
reviews, and it's not there because
Mm.
they know what I have
Right.
looked at. And I just think
Mm.
that's super important. But similarly, being aware of what we're inclined to read
Mm-hmm.
and pushing ourselves in different directions. I'll give you an
Yeah.
example that isn't at all connected to spirituality directly, but the book I finished last night, it was called Black Paul, and it was
Mm.
the story of basketball beginning in 1967, when a second league, the ABA, was formed as a
Yeah.
challenge to the NBA. And
Mm.
it was really the story of race in America at that
Mm.
time,
Mm.
and how the changes and the challenges were reflected in the evolution of basketball from 1967 to 1980,
Yeah.
when the
Mm.
Boston Celtics and Los Angeles Lakers, rivalry
Yeah.
heated up with Larry Bird
Yeah.
and Magic Johnson.
Yeah.
So it had nothing to do with the Christian faith at all,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
but it was one of those diverse books. It was written
Mm.
by an African American scholar from American University in Baltimore,
Yeah.
and it helped me to see, like, I lived
Yeah.
through that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw that as a sports fan,
Yeah.
but I didn't see it the way she did.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
it threw open another world
Yeah.
of wonder, another
Mm.
world of questions, of
Wow.
curiosity. So it's also reading diverse things like that.
Yeah.
A biography of
Yeah.
Martin Luther King that came out a couple of years ago would be another example of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I could go on, but
Yeah.
I do think it's important, and I
Yeah.
also think it's hard. So you saying it's hard,
Yeah.
I affirm that
Yeah.
it is. It is hard.
Yeah. Most of our audience is pastors and ministry leaders. When you
Mhm.
think about pastors and ministry leaders, like, how would you apply the diverse reading? Why is it good? Why would it be good for pastors and leaders when you think about the work that they do?
Yeah, that's. I'm sure it is challenging in their own pastoral ministry, in unique ways that I've never faced. I mean, I think that being a reader themselves first, ensuring that the kind of readers that they would like members of their congregation to be, that they're modeling that first. And there may be some cases where what I'm proposing of being acquainted with diverse voices, in terms of theological streams, as well
Mm-hmm.
as in other ways, that could pose a challenge.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if they see as pastoral leaders, if they see, as I do, value in looking beyond that which their particular tradition is framed by,
Yeah.
and just being able to discourse with others,
Yeah.
and even people coming in to their congregation, they're going to bring with them
Yeah.
different stories, hopefully,
Yeah.
and different makeups, and so reading diversely to the extent that you can acknowledge their stories, you can enter into their world, I think would be helpful
Yeah.
to pastors and church leaders. I know it is for me. I'm not a
Yeah.
pastor, but
Yeah.
I teach regularly in our congregation, and reading in both directions helps me, because almost every congregation that I've ever spoken to or been a part of, they're not homogeneous entirely. There is always more diversity in the pews than we might like to think there is.
Yeah, that's good. And I'm sure that our listeners are all, putting two and two together, and they're like, yeah, I can understand why a diversity of reading would be good for me. And just reflecting as a pastor, I think one of the biggest benefits is it helps me understand people who have different kinds of experiences than I do, and where I might think, why in the world would you think that, or why in the world would you make that decision? If I have read something that has given me some insight into whatever their experience is, that can help me to understand that person in this particular situation. Anyway, that's kind of how I see the benefit in one way.
Yeah,
And
that's helpful.
to be honest, I think even as a preacher, that's helpful, because I'm not just locked in on one way of seeing this particular passage, of scripture. I can think about the various ways that people have thought about it, or even if I don't remember the exact, thing that I may have read, but it just informs. It gives me a bigger view of how this particular text might impact our congregation or a particular person, or
Right.
even myself in that moment. Yeah.
I think of books like Ken Bailey, that Ken Bailey wrote, we published at IVP a few years ago, Jesus through Middle Eastern eyes and things like that. That's really getting at what you're saying. It's not just even contemporary issues where this idea of diverse reading comes in. It's also, I think Bailey did masterful work of helping us understand what was really happening in that context at that time, so that we more faithfully understand Scripture.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to ask a little bit about, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but you talk about developing a liturgy of reading, and can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think it is that idea of crafting a life where time is made. Time is set aside. That it's not I go away on vacation, I take a stack of books and I do it then, but it becomes a daily part of your life. There's also a every moment holy liturgy piece in one of the Douglas McElvey volumes, that as I begin, the liturgy is a liturgy as I begin a book, and it's fairly short, but I am mindful of that. Maybe I'll send it to you afterward. Mindful of that liturgy as I approach a new book, particularly if it's a book centered on the Christian faith, but not only then, what does this reading stir up in my heart? What questions does it stir up? What longings, what tears did it prompt? What joy?
Wow.
It's just a beautiful prayer as we approach a book. And I think that was in the first volume that was published a number of years ago. I just kept it in front of me. and particularly again as I read a passage of scripture or a book. I'm rereading a book by Gene Fleming right now called Between Walden and the Whirlwind. That just seemed like something I needed to go back and
Yeah.
pull off the shelf and reread because
Yeah.
the current context seems like such a whirlwind and
Yeah.
not at all like Thoreau's Walden.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's this liturgy before reading.
Yeah.
It's that idea of inviting the Lord to meet us in the pages, and then to respond to
Yeah.
be aware of what is stirring up in
Yeah.
our own souls. So that's pretty much a part of most of the reading that I do.
That's pretty cool. I didn't realize, and maybe you spelled it out in the book, and maybe I missed it, but that's what you meant by a liturgy of reading. Coming to the book, framing. Oh, look. Okay, you're pulling out the book.
Yeah. Well, there were some other things that I said as well. I'm trying to find it, and that's
Yeah.
probably what you're referring to.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead and keep flipping through, and I'll keep talking for a minute. But the idea that we come with a liturgy of sorts to a particular book, that's not something I've ever done. But it sounds actually really good. So go ahead and share what we just found
Well,
there.
I haven't found it yet, Marcus. So you may need to keep talking.
Okay.
But yeah,
Okay.
I'll send you the rabbit room piece, and really, I mean, it was pretty transformational when I first read it, and as I have taught about this book in my local congregation, it is one of the things. Those words probably stood out as much or even more than the words that we delved into from the book. So I'll see if I can find it here.
Okay.
There were like 7 different pieces of the liturgy you're referring to.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. I would love to. I would love to do include that in the show notes or something for folks that want to look that up. I don't want to.
Here we
go
go.
ahead. You got it. Good. Go for it. Good.
Yeah. So the developing a liturgy of reading, making a commitment of time to read was step 1. Finding the format that best fits your pattern of reading. Finding a space or spaces that are conducive to reflective reading, which we talked about earlier. Have a journal nearby. Build lists of books to read. So I'm never scratching my head saying, what do I read next? I mean, sometimes something will zoom in around others that were at the top of the list, but I always have that list. Read and then dialogue in community with others. I think reading can be seen as something that you do in your head, like you do in a solitary way, but I absolutely love reading in community with others. I'm doing that right now with one of my pastors at the request of that pastor to read over the course of a year. Intentionally choose to read authors whose perspective is distinct from our own, we've talked about, and then share about what you've read and why it's impacted you. As a former publisher, I know that more books are read as a result of a friend telling a friend or a family member about the impact on their life than anything else. So as you read, be prepared to share both in person as well as in whatever communication channels you have. Try to elevate good books.
That's great. I love that. And I love the reading in community part. I want to ask you just a little bit about that. When you say read in community, can you just kind of fill out what you mean by that and what the benefit of that is?
Yeah. Well, I think, book groups have been with us, right? I mean, all of my life I've known, and it's hearing the different takeaways that, each of us made in the image of God. We're going to have unique takeaways because of who we are and our backgrounds and our thoughts, our training. And so having an opportunity to read books, at least on occasion with others, I think we'll learn something
Hmm.
new. And I'm just always curious, what did you think of this book?
Yeah.
Maybe I struggled with it,
Yeah.
and someone else, it was just the greatest thing they've ever read.
Yeah.
So I'm not in a book group that like meets every other month or something like that, though I know a lot of people are. But there are people who, I'm reading the same thing they are, at the same time, and then we make it a point to get together one way or another,
Yeah.
whether it's in person or a phone call, or we exchange emails, or do a Zoom with one another. So I just think it's an additional point of learning
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
doing life
Yeah.
life together
Yeah.
around the thoughts in a book.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. We have one of the women in our church is starting a new women's book club, and our administrator is going to be a part of that and has already read the book. It just in the last month, so she kind of got ahead of the curve on that, and she came to me, and it was one of these experiences of diverse reading something from a diverse perspective. It's a novel. I think it's called Everything Sad Is True. Does that sound familiar? It,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah, and I haven't read it, but she told me, she kind of gave me the whole summary of everything, and it challenged her, and so it was kind of cool for me, just for me to learn from what she had read. I was
yeah,
learning, but then also getting to bounce ideas and thoughts back to her, and we had a great conversation. And I look forward to that group having some great conversations. Anyway, so yes, I affirm the
yeah.
value of that. And I haven't been in a book group. Like I have done them, but I haven't done it for a few years now, probably since COVID. So I need to get back into doing some communal reading like that.
Yeah.
I think that'd be really good. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and as you, I think, know from a prior conversation we had about the book, The Language of the Soul, my wife and I used
yeah.
to host monthly dinners in our home.
Mm,
It got up to 7,500 people. And more often than not, a book was the centerpiece. We would have an
mm,
author come in and read from his or her book, and then dialogue with the friends that had gathered with us, and we would
yeah.
serve a meal. So, I mean,
Wow.
that was the most intense and
Yeah.
intentional book connected thing that we've ever done. After the
Yeah.
pandemic, we restarted it on a much smaller
Okay.
scale. We couldn't sustain it at that level more than a couple
Yeah.
years.
But 75 or 100, how do you do a book discussion with that many people?
Well, it was more of a reading and a dialogue with the author.
Oh,
But
with the author. Oh, cool.
yeah, and then we would, but people would get copies ahead of time,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
so they could ask intelligent
Yeah.
questions of the author, and he or she
Yeah.
could respond. So it was kind of we thought of it as a literary salon, kind of
Yeah.
a European notion.
Yeah.
What I imagine maybe the early 1900s Paris might have been like, or something.
Yeah.
It was just a lot of fun, and then breaking bread together. It
Yeah.
was great.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that. I want to ask you a few questions, just sort of curiosity questions.
Hmm.
What do you read on a Kindle or something, anything like that?
Um, Print books and then audio. I
And
sometimes
audio.
will,
Okay.
I'll be in the middle of a book, and then I have a long trip, and I'll finish it on audio.
Okay.
But I have an iPad. I read manuscripts on
Okay.
my iPad. If a publisher has asked me to read something ahead of time, or an author has
Yeah.
said, "Hey, I'd love your feedback before I turn it into
Yeah.
my publisher." I just did that with a novel that Waterbrook is
Mm,
publishing, um, and
yeah.
so I can and do read on
Yeah.
an iPad, but it's for more utility
Okay.
when a publisher or an author who has asked me, and the book's
Yeah.
not out yet.
Okay. Yeah. And then I was going to ask about audiobooks. What do you think about? Does that count as reading?
Oh, I believe absolutely. That's one of
Okay.
the liturgy points that you asked about, was
Yeah.
find the format. And for a lot of people, audio has become that format,
Hmm.
and the production value of audiobooks has just gotten so
Mm,
good. The narrators and musical pieces to it, and the organization
Yeah.
how you can, get to different chapters and things. So
Yeah.
it's not my preferred reading, but it is definitely reading.
Yeah. Okay,
So
good. I'm glad to
don't
hear
let
that
anyone tell you it's
because,
not.
okay, I love it because I actually listened to the audiobook of this World of Wonders.
Okay. Okay,
So
good.
I'm
Well,
like, I hope that
then you
counts. I
read
hope
it.
that counts. Good.
Absolutely.
um, and then here's the other kind of curiosity question. And you kind of mentioned that you were reading a book a second time. What do you think about, and I'll just share, I'm not sure, other than maybe Lord of the Rings and Ender's Game might be the only books that I've read twice.
Okay.
But what's the value in reading something a second time?
Yeah. I don't do it a lot,
Mm-hmm.
Marcus, but some of my favorites, like Mere Christianity by
Mm-hmm.
Lewis, and who, by the way, Lewis said, for every
Mm-hmm.
new book you read, you need
Yeah.
to be reading a,
I did read
you
some.
know,
I have read Lewis more than once, so okay,
okay.
that counts too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he definitely postulated somewhere. I don't remember which of the books that, yeah, for every new book, read a classic. And Mere Christianity is one of those. Our church is actually reading that
Mm-hmm.
together at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I read that just about every year. A little book called Touch of Wonder by Arthur Gordon, I read once or twice a year. And John Bailey, I mentioned earlier. I think it's more my pattern of rereading. It's more, the book is just so important to me.
Mm-hmm.
The message has done something in terms of building up um, my faith, or building up my tenderness,
Mm.
toward
Yeah.
others, or just stories that I want to make sure as I get older that I don't forget. Like
Yeah.
I'm I'm committing stories from
Yeah.
A Touch of Wonder, including one that you would have listened to then, called The
Mm-hmm.
Night the Stars Fell. A story of a father and a young son, being awakened in the middle
Yeah.
of the night to go out on the beach in coastal Carolina to watch
Yeah.
the stars fall at 3 a.m.
Yeah. Mm.
I want to not forget that story as
Yeah.
I age, and so yeah, I think for me that's the value. There's also a sense of reminding myself, the questions that I had when I was younger and
Mm-hmm.
in middle age, and now
Yeah.
later in life. I'll go back and look at Charles Colston's book, Loving God, as one
Yeah.
example of one of the seminal books for me
Yeah.
in the 1980s, or Disappointment with God by Yancey, or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And just kind of being reminded of the evolution of my thinking, of my
Yeah.
faith, of my questions, and of my
Yeah.
hopes. So,
Yeah.
but mostly it's books that have just had such an incredible impact, and I
Yeah.
want to not forget them.
Yeah. I love it. Um, Here's kind of a closing question.
Yeah.
I think pastors and ministry leaders, we do read, most of us, and sometimes there's maybe a feeling like I need to read more, right? Or I went through a season where I felt like I've read like I, for a while it was just like I was gorging myself on reading, almost
Yeah.
too much, like where it became um like an achievement status thing in my own brain. Like, I've read this many books, and I cranked through
Mm.
another one, and then I just kind of got annoyed at myself and I stopped. And I almost like fasted from it for a little while. And but there's this feeling sometimes of it being a chore. So I guess my question is, when it feels like, what kind of encouragement would you give to someone, and pastors and ministry leaders in particular, um, when reading feels like a chore? What
Yeah.
kind of encouragement would you give? Yeah.
Well, take a break from it when
Yeah.
it's feeling that way, and don't feel bad about that.
Yeah.
In the book, I tell a story of a bookseller friend in Dallas, Texas, who he was seeing a spiritual director. And one of the outcomes of one of their meetings was, have you ever thought about fasting from books? What he
Mm,
was
mm,
saying was, I
mm.
feel like I don't have time to read the Bible. And it just, it's not a daily part, or a regular part of of my reading, and I don't know why.
Hmm.
And the spiritual director asked him that question: have you ever thought about fasting from reading books? And, I would have imagined to Rick, the friend, that would have been an absolute anathema. How dare you ask that question?
Yeah.
But he did. He took a period of time and he stopped reading. And he's a bookseller. He needs to know about these books that he's putting in the hands of people.
Yeah.
But it opened up space for other good things. So the encouragement would be, if it feels like a chore, then just take a break from it. But return to it in time. Don't let non-reading become the liturgy of your life.
Right.
But just take a break and do other things. Engage with the arts, or read poetry. It's very it's typically short, and you can read a poem a day or something. Read things that are easier to pick up and set down. And I think that we all go through seasons where we can't read. I certainly did during the pandemic. I was, for the first time in probably 45 years, I found myself unable to read in the way that I always had from the time I was 17 or 18. And don't feel bad about it. Don't, Brennan Manning had that classic line in the Ragamuffin Gospel: don't should on yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Don't feel that you should be doing that. Just take a break.
Yeah. I love it. Jeff, thank you for this conversation again. It's been really great to catch up with you again. I enjoy having you on. This is your third time on the podcast, and I'm going to record my intro right after we finish this conversation. So by the time people get to this part of the conversation, they'll know about which other episodes you've been on. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'll point folks to those episodes, and every time it's been really wonderful. And so it's been really great to catch up with you again.
It has been great to be with you, Marcus. Thank you for asking.
And let me ask you, if anyone wanted to find out more about you and the work that you're doing, or more about the book, where could they go?
Yeah, they could go to Jeffrey Crosby, JEFFREY Crosby.net. And you can email me through that site. You can see the books, including one that is forthcoming in the fall on music. And I'm happy to reply if you get in touch.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you. It's been a great talking with you again.
All right. Thanks for having me, Marcus. Take care.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Hey, if this episode was helpful to you, I hope that you'll share it with another leader who needs to hear it. And if you want to go deeper on helping your church engage in God's mission in the way that your church is uniquely called and wired to reach your neighborhood, I want to invite you to grab a copy of my book, Beyond Thingification: Helping Your Church Engage in God's Mission. You can find that on Amazon. And you can also get a free study guide at marcuswatson.com/book, and that's Marcus with a K. The music you hear on this episode is by Derek Rice, and you can find his music on any streaming platform. And again, thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time here on Spiritual Life and Leadership.